Hey guys, welcome to Student Night. So glad you're here. I'm so appreciative of you guys showing up each and every week, just to learn a little bit more about who we are, who God says we are, and just understanding a little bit more of this idea of community. That's what we want West to be. And so tonight we're going to dive into that. You're going to be in your small groups for most of the time. And for this time, what we're going to do is we're going to do the lesson in small groups and questions in small groups. Why is that? It gives us more time to break it down, and for this week, it is super important for us to be able to ask more questions. I think that while I'm teaching, sometimes you guys have some questions that you might have or might think of, but then it gets small groups, and you're like, oh, shoot, I forgot, or no, I don't want to say that now. So we're going to have more time for those things. And so if it's your first time, welcome. So glad you're here. Obviously, this is new to you, too. So we're just going to go through the content, go through and just ask questions to your leaders along the way. Your leaders can pause the video. There's going to be specific points that we pause it. But that's kind of how this is going to work. So I got a question for you guys. What would be your ideal movie? Is it mystery or is it happily ever after? Those two very different things, sometimes connected, but mystery truly has that mysterious, spooky, what's going on? What's going to happen next? Not knowing who the characters are a lot of the times, not knowing who specifically the villain is. And on the other side, what you have is the happily ever after stories, the fairy tales, the things that all becomes well and happy and good. One of my favorite shows is Criminal Minds, and the mystery behind Criminal Minds draws me in. Now, some of you guys are like, Criminal Minds, that's a weird show. But for me, that's what draws me into what's happening. And so for you guys, I want you to answer a question in your small group. So the question is for you, do you prefer mystery movies or do you prefer happily ever after? Talk about it right now. Leaders, pause the video, and then you can go right back to it. I'm feeling that there's probably more happily ever after picks that were going on. I think that more people would pick happily ever after, but for me, again, it's mystery. Why mystery? Why are we talking about mystery? Well, that's kind of the series we've been talking about. We've been talking about this idea of connected of science and faith, how these two things are intertwined together, and a lot of times that gives a lot of curiosity, a lot of questions, a lot of doubts, and a lot of mystery. There's a lot of things that we don't know about, and when we talk about faith, the truth is we really don't see a lot of faith being practiced maybe in the world, in our lives, in our families. We may not know what it looks like. So truly, faith is a mystery. And for us, we have to have a new way of looking at the church. We have to open up to understanding that somebody else knows something that we actually don't. And so the idea is when we don't know something, instead of fake it till you make it, the idea is we should ask questions. If you heard of the phrase, fake it till you make it, it's essentially like, keep going along, act like you know something, like I used to do with sports. Oh, yeah. No, I know about hockey. Yeah, this is what you do. But the truth is, I'm not really a hockey fan. And so for you guys, fake it till you make it could mean tons of different things for your friend groups. So what I want us to do is now pause again and ask yourselves this question, leaders. Who is that person that you would go to that helps you with questions? So students, leaders, take some time to answer that. Pause the video and we'll get back to it. You see, the questions that we have aren't new to anybody. You might be feeling like it's unique to you, that you don't know, that you're the dumb one, that you're slow, that you don't recognize what's going on around you. But the truth is, all of us have had questions. All of us do have questions. I have questions. And one of the ways that really we can translate back to, what we look back to in all things, is looking at one of the first Christian leaders of the Bible, Christian specific, so post-Jesus time, is a guy named Paul. And Paul writes about this very idea of a life being transformed with an encounter with God. And Paul went through Went from wanting to stop Christianity from spreading to encouraging to doing way more than anyone could ever imagine. You see, in Colossians 1:15 through 17, it says this: "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him." You see, Paul is saying this and stating some words in here that we've may have been mentioning or talking about. Paul is saying that Jesus was there at the start of creation. Christians believe that Jesus is actually God in human or body form. In Jesus, the whole world was created. Think about it this way: Jesus, God, one. Oftentimes we talk about God. Oftentimes we talk about Jesus. But the idea is they're uniquely different, but the same. And so that's really what our mind needs to wrap around and understand a little bit more. Now let's go back to this whole creation idea. I'm not sure exactly what creation looks like. Genesis talks about it. I'm not exactly sure all the answers to how God did it. A lot of people are like, it's like building Legos. No, not necessarily. You see, this isn't about God versus science. You see, God made science. God created things. So God created science. That's often not something we hear. That's not often something we look at. But God created science from the very beginning. That is something that he created. And those things don't fight against each other. Oftentimes we think science is so much against who God is, and God is so much against science. But not necessarily. In all things, you can see examples where things don't necessarily line up with God, and you can see things that do line up with God. Because guess what? There's good things, there's bad things. And we can understand a little bit more of who we can put our confidence in when it comes to God and science. So, I have a question for you. Do you think God made science? Go ahead and pause the video and explain why or why not that is the case for you. So, as we skip forward a little bit more, as you can see, that God and science can be connected. They can directly be connected. The idea is, though, that our faith is built on a person. And that sounds weird. When we think about the scientific method, we build in believing systems that develop a final answer that has science behind it, has facts. But the idea is that faith goes beyond that. That faith is connected to a person, Jesus, who we believe is the Son of God, who is behind all scientific understanding. See, when we put our trust in Jesus, the idea of creation, the idea of how we were made, the idea of how we were made with personalities, how we were constructed, how the world was constructed, all of a sudden becomes a little different lens than what the world sees. And so for us to be able to understand it more, you can understand that you can trust someone before you know everything. Back to the whole questions idea, that before you really truly know what's going on, you can trust someone. The person's Jesus. That's the person that we need to put our faith in. So let's pause right here and let's ask this question. How easy is it for you to trust someone? Why or why not? Specifically, how is it easy for you to put trust in someone that you can't see? Go ahead, pause the video, and talk about it some more. So, many people live by this. In fact, Galileo, you might have heard of him in history and or the science classes that you take. in this, he was a famous Italian scientist, lived in the 1600s, and Galileo famously said this: "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forgo their use." I'm going to read it again. "I do not feel obligated to believe that the same God who created us with senses, reasons, and intellect has intended us to forgo their use." In other words, God made our brains. God made us. God made us who we are. And so, for us to understand a little bit more, we need to be rethinking our old concepts as we learn more new ones. A lot of times, once we learn something, we store it as a fact, we store it in the back of our brains, then anytime something comes against that, we just go, no, this is the right answer. But the truth is, learning more about faith, understanding more, can help us open up to who God is and who Jesus said he is. One of the concepts being our faith is built on Jesus. To put it another way, we don't need to pick a side between God and science because God is bigger than any of that. You see, that's what we need to focus on. So I'm going to ask this question of you, and then leaders, you can pause the video. Is putting your faith in Jesus natural for you to do? Go ahead, pause the video, hit pause, and we'll talk about it. You see, for you guys, you don't have to know everything to trust someone. It's not true. You don't have to have it all together, all figured out to trust that someone else is telling you the truth. Wondering is okay. Mystery is okay. Curiosity is okay. Asking genuine, real questions that you might have, it's great. And you can rest in the fact that you don't have to know everything in order to trust someone. In fact, if you don't hear anything else today, I want you to walk away knowing that there are two key ideas that you should consider as a result of everything we've talked about. One, you should ask questions. Questions are good. Now, I'm not saying yell them out in the middle of student night or in a class or, I don't know, in random places that don't make sense. Ask questions at the right time. But ask. You cannot learn anything if you do not ask about what's going on around you. You cannot learn anything with that happening. So, for you, the second thing we have to do, so we have to ask questions. The second thing we have to do is you can trust Jesus. By trusting in Jesus, your life can be changed. Truthfully. So, I want you to stop real quick and ask this. What's one helpful way to deal with doubt when it comes to faith? Go ahead, answer that in your small groups. So this isn't necessarily a question that I have of you, but what if everything we talked about today has potential to change the way you think about what it means to be a Christian? Imagine if this could help you build a faith that will last through the questions and wondering that science has. That our faith in Jesus mixed with our questions doesn't change our faith. It challenges us to push forward with our faith. What if that could happen? So, a question for you. The last question, and then we're going to wrap up small groups. There's actually two parts to this question. What would change if your faith was built on the person Jesus rather than having to know everything? Ask yourself, ask each other that question. And the second thing, I just want you to talk about the questions. Last week, your small group might have talked about that questions that you might have. That might include why are there bad things in the world? Why is there sin in the world? That might include how are the planets formed? Anything like that. Talk about it. Talk about it amongst yourselves and know that, your small group leaders is a safe, trusted adult that you can go to with those questions. And so that's all we have for tonight. Hang out with your small groups until you're dismissed. And so small group leaders, talk about those 2 questions. And then you guys can wrap up, hang out for a little bit.